All right, I hit record and I'm with Lindsey Hughes. And Lindsey, I'm gonna give a bio, which is gonna feel weird because you gotta sit here and watch me
No
read your
worries.
your bio. So, Lindsey, you had a wide-ranging career in Hollywood as a development executive. You worked on feature films, televisions, movies, series, animation, and live action. And you're the author of two books, nonfiction books, How to Turn Your Screenplay into a Novel and The Pitch Master's Top Tactics. Sorry, I just because we're going to talk about who you are, I just condensed your bio down.
Sure.
Yeah, so talk to us a little bit. You reached out to me about your new book, and I was super excited to talk to you. You've been around the Dialogue Doctor community for a while. I think 2022 is when we first met, right? Or the first time we like
Yes.
exchanged emails. Yeah.
Yes, I sent you your local writers group refused to let you talk because you didn't have an MFA. So I sent you my article on professionals are not important. Professionals built the Titanic. So,
Yep. Yeah, the article is actually very encouraging and helpful as well.
oh,
Yeah,
good.
I changed a little bit how I pitch myself to people after reading that. It was really good.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, it was really helpful. Um, so talk to us a little bit about where you've been, where you are in your creative journey. Help us get to know you a little bit.
Okay, great. So I spent 30 years in Hollywood in the part of the business called creative development. So my job was to find ideas for movies and TV shows. That could be literally just an idea, it could be an article, a true story, a script, a book, anything. And then do what we call develop it into a screenplay, which means hiring writers, working with writers, and telling them how to fix their script. So filmmaking is a really collaborative process, and there are a lot of hands in the pot to make a great screenplay. And I was one of those people. When you read about someone leaving a project because of creative differences, I would be the person they had creative differences with because I worked yeah. So because I worked for studios and networks and producers.
Mm.
And so I was always telling writers what to do. But because of that, I have extensive experience both pitching, because I had to pitch to my bosses when I found something I wanted to buy, and listening to thousands of pitches,
Mm.
and also working with writers and on their stories to make them better. And finally, helping them pitch themselves better because I would have what are called meet and greets where writers would just come. It would be a general meeting. I'd read something they liked. I didn't have a job for them, but I wanted to meet them.
Mm.
And writers are not always the best about talking about themselves. And so I
Yeah.
started giving feedback, unsolicited feedback to people that I was working with or meeting. And that kind of evolved into my business now, which is called the Pitch Master, where I coach screenwriters and novelists. I'm a story coach, but I also help with career.
Mm.
I teach writers how to pitch themselves and their projects because no one is going to buy what you're selling or hire you to write something if you can't talk about who you are and what you do.
It's so true. It's so true. So I just want to get right into it. You're like listening to pitches, tons and tons of pitches. Pitching is something, not even if you're like looking for Hollywood, like, if you're trying to get an agent for like novel representation, like with a trad publisher, or
Yep.
if you're talking to like a small publisher, like pitching is just something we have to do as writers. And I infamously stink at it. So what are like mistakes you saw when you were holding these events that made you go like, oh, I need to help these people?
Well, first of all, I want to add one more person that you have to pitch to as a novelist, and that's your readers. Those are your most important people, even above and beyond your agent, because or
Yeah.
trying to get an agent, because your readers are really who you want to please. Um, so the biggest mistake that everyone makes, whether you're a screenwriter or novelist, is too much detail. So
Mm.
I'm big on catchphrases because they help you remember things. And one of mine is pitching is a conversation, not a presentation. So you want to engage someone and get them excited about your story with the goal of them saying, "Tell me more." So tell me more can mean buy my book, they buy your book, they ask to read your manuscript or your
Mm.
screenplay. They want to have a meeting with you. Tell me more can look a lot of different ways. But to get to the tell me more, you don't have to tell everything. You want to tell just enough to be enticing. And so that's the biggest mistake. And also just not feeling insecure about pitching. And I'm the weirdo. I like to pitch, but I recognize I'm an outlier. So the other thing is practice. A lot of people think they can just wing it. They think they can wing a meeting or wing a conference, and you
Mm,
you need to practice your pitch, and you need to practice how you introduce yourself, and you need to do that in the mirror. You need to do that to your friends and your family, and the more you practice, the better you get. So just as an example, y'all, Jeff sent me some questions that he was going to ask me today. And while I had my coffee this morning, I practiced what I was going to say out loud, even though this
nice.
is stuff I've talked about 1,000 times before, right? So preparation and practice and less is more.
That's nice. So, how do you know I'm in the middle of a pitch? How do I know when I'm giving too much information? Like
Well,
when do I know that I'm crossing that line?
okay, you have to, and this is hard. This also takes practice. You have to think about it as a conversation. So you have to be engaged
Hmm.
and paying attention to the person you're talking to. And everyone, if you lose someone, their eyes glaze over or they look past you or something. And when that happens, don't panic. Just say, "Hey, I think I've lost you. Where are you confused?" Again, think of it as a conversation. Ask them a question to re-engage.
Hmm.
Um, and that that also takes the pressure off because it doesn't feel so formal if you think, okay, or also if you lose your place, you can say, "Hold on, let me back up. I missed something." It just makes you more human. No one's perfect. And so you don't have to be perfect when you're pitching. Just be engaged.
Okay. So engagement, super good. What kind of stuff, like if I'm practicing a pitch, like, if you asked me to tell me about the most current novel I'm working on, I could like give you details, practice the details for the next like hour and a half. What's going to help me get to that? Like, tell me more about
Okay,
this.
so I'm going to give you my formula, which I
Oh,
call a cocktail pitch,
okay.
because it's what, when you're at a cocktail party and someone says what you're working on, it's how you answer. Most people say elevator pitch. I just think cocktail pitch is more fun. So it's very short and sweet. And by the way, you can use this to write your blurb. You might need to fill in a little bit more detail, but your back
Hmm.
of book blurb also, because that's a pitch, right? So you're going to start off. Remember that too much detail, people get lost because they're not grounded in your story.
Hmm.
You know your story backwards and forwards. They've never heard it. So you have to help them get focused about your story and what you're talking about. And so the first thing is to open with your format. So we're talking about screenwriters and novelists today. So you might say, "I'm a novelist." Or you might say, if you're a screenwriter, you have to get more specific. "I'm a sitcom writer. I write 1 hour dramas. I write action movies." Something to, so immediately I'm like, okay, I know what the genre is I'm listening to.
Because you're like
And
creating a frame for them, I guess.
yes, it's going to help give your listener a clue about what they're listening for and to, and it's just going to help ground them in the story.
Hmm.
So then the second part is also grounding, and this is a Hollywood trick, but I encourage novelists to use it not on your book blur, but when you're pitching in person, and
Hmm.
it's the X meets Y, right? So this is Avengers meets Frozen.
Hmm.
And I want you guys to use movies and TV shows. I know that I know it seems counterintuitive if you're pitching a novel, but there's a lot of books out there and most people have not read them, even if it's a bestseller. But everyone knows who the Avengers are. Even if they haven't seen it, they know the Avengers, even if they haven't heard of Frozen. So this is what I call touchstones. So the key to picking out your touchstones is you want to pick something that everyone knows
Hmm.
and that made money. Don't pick this movie or TV show that got canceled after 2 episodes, okay? Because you're by using your touchstones, you're saying your idea is viable and that, whoever it is wants to buy it or publish it, right?
Hmm.
So that's again grounding your reader. If I tell you my book or my movie is Avengers meets Frozen, you're like, oh, like you're like, okay, well, we've got superheroes and we've got a fairy tale. So this is about super. It's like a superhero fairy tale. I'm already in, right? And so
Mm,
people are already interested. Then you go to your hook, and this is sort of the hardest thing to figure out, but it's this universal thing in your story that's going to make people feel like the story is about them. So the easiest thing to do is ask a question like for Monsters Inc. Do you remember when you were a kid and you were afraid there was a monster in your closet?
mm.
Right? That's kind of a universal thing, which is one of the genius things about that movie. But by asking a question, everyone is already inside your story. The other thing you can do is use a metaphor like the geeks versus this story. This is about the geeks versus the jocks, something like that, where everyone is like, oh, I know what that is, right?
Yeah.
So that's your hook. And it may take a minute for you to figure that out, but just kind of backtrack. What is the emotional core of your story? And
Mm,
that's where you're going to find your hook. So next you segue into your main character and their emotional need. So I love to use Katniss from the Hunger Games because it's just so darn emotional. So Katniss is a young girl whose sacrifice to save her sister's life starts a revolution. Now, you see, I didn't talk about the Hunger Games. I didn't talk about the president or the districts or any of that. I just went to the core of the emotion, right? And I love that example because to me, your pitch is over. I'm immediately like, tell me more.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But if you can keep going. So next we've got the story appetizer, and it's where you spend like 1 to 3 sentences giving a little bit more detail about your story. A little bit of detail. It's just more about your main character. Maybe you have to introduce the world. I really encourage people to only talk about the main character. If it's a love story, you might want to talk about the couple. If you absolutely have to, you can introduce the villain here, but I really don't think you need it. Like I just said about Katniss.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you're going to end on a cliffhanger. So again, you want to end on a cliffhanger to get to your tell me more. So your cliffhanger is, will she survive the the games, or will
Gotcha.
Katniss save her sister, right? And I'm like, oh, will she save her sister? I want to know.
That's awesome.
Right? And so then you get people to do whatever the tell me more is, whether it's hit the buy button, read your manuscript, whatever it is. So it really you see what I mean about less is more?
Yeah, no, I'm totally there. I've got a couple questions.
Yeah.
It feels like you're avoiding world building, which I actually 100% agree with, but I'm just curious for you why that's like keeping out of like, okay, so we're in a world where blah blah
Okay.
blah.
So a couple things. So in your story appetizer, you could sprinkle something in about the world, but
Mhm.
it's a sprinkle. It's not an explanation. Okay.
It's not a full dunk.
And right.
We're not baptizing anybody into the
Exactly. I don't want to hear about your five magic systems and how they work and the initiation. And I don't care. I'm gonna glaze over. You're gonna lose me. So
yeah,
it's a sprinkle. If you can do a cocktail pitch that leans into the world and you start with the movie trailer in a world
yeah,
where, right? If you want, I you can do that. Like, let me think what the hunger in a world where people must die to make sure their family is fed,
yeah.
something. You can do that. But again, you've got to make sure you're hitting the emotion and not just the details of the world, because world building is fun. Readers love it, but it's not emotional and it's not going to get you to your tell me more.
That's so interesting. It's funny because we tell people all the time in dialogue doctor stuff, like JP Laura and I do, like, hey, world building's like interesting kind of gravy on the mashed potatoes, but the actual like emotional drive is that lead vehicle character that like
Yeah.
pushes you through the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you talk about the like appetizer of the story, when you're trying to like sell your lead character, what kind of things do you recommend people focusing on?
It's the emotion. It's the
Okay.
emotion that you just said in the previous sentence. So if we're going to do Hunger Games, Katniss has got to fight for her life to save not only her sister but her family.
Mm,
Some, you know, and along the way, she's got to decide whether she's going to kill her best friend.
gotcha.
All right. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What? You know,
Yeah, it's great. Well, it's great. It's focusing on the like getting somebody to be like, okay, I'm interested in learning more about the story rather than I'm going to 100% commit to your story at this 5 minute encounter, I think
yes.
is an interesting because it sounds like to me what you're saying is the goal is like, hey, let's have a second conversation.
Yes. I mean, if they say, tell me more about your story, that sounds amazing, then you can maybe, I mean, please practice talking about your magic system in a succinct way, but then you can maybe do it. You can give what in the film business side of things, I call it the formal pitch, which is all three acts,
Mm,
everything from it's still not a ton of detail. You don't because you'll get your listener will get lost in the weeds, as
mm,
they say, but you can. But yes, the goal is some kind of engagement.
okay. What's the difference? So you kind of compared like, okay, I'm pitching to readers versus like pitching to what you were, which was like, a development. Um, I can't remember the phrase you used, but
Development executive
thank
or
you. Yeah.
creative executive, they're sort of interchangeable.
If a storyteller's approaching like those two different groups, is there any difference between those for you, or is it like it doesn't matter who you're talking to, get your pitch right?
Um, that no one's ever asked me that before. Let me think. I think yes and no.
Okay.
So the goal to me, you want to get readers excited, and
Mm,
that's the goal of the cocktail pitch is excitement. So I think whoever you're talking to, whether it's an executive, meaning like a film executive or a publishing person or an agent, you want excitement. You want people to be excited to read your story or hear about it. So I think it's kind of the same thing.
mm,
It's all versions of selling, right?
yeah. You've coached people before, so I'm just going to give you a hypothetical because I think I see this with a lot of authors. When we
Okay.
get to the point of like, okay, I finished my novel, I finished my book, and I'm ready to pitch it. I'm going to pitch it to agents. At that point, we've been through like, I edit slight, but I've been through four revisions of the book. And I feel all of the like problems that probably no one else is going to see, but I
Yes.
know all of them. How do I get over that to actually like sell this thing?
Wow, that's a great question. So the first thing is I think you want to talk just not in a cocktail pitch formal way, but you want to talk about your book to your friends, whether it's your
Mm,
author friends or your mom or your wife, and just in the action of talking through it and telling them the story, you're going to kind of get where they're excited and where they ask more questions, and
mm,
that's going to help you get re-excited about your book, right?
yeah.
Because I have that with my nonfiction book too. It's just like by the end of it, you're just like, oh my God, I'm sick of
Yeah.
this. And you have to get re-excited. So I get it. Um, so I think that's the first thing is just talking through it with a friend. Think you're brilliant. So you don't want to,
Mm,
you're not getting feedback from them, but seeing where they get excited and where they're like, "Oh," that's going to
mm,
help get you be like, oh, this is kind of good. And
yeah.
then you're
Kind of
going to
find
be,
those emotional touchstones to let's, yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I would do. And also, I'm a big believer of putting things in your drawer. So put it in your drawer for, I think, 2 weeks or even or
Mm,
longer is optimal. Sometimes you don't because of whatever reason you can't. But if you can step away from it for a hot minute, when you reread it, you're going
mm,
to get reengaged.
nice. That's great.
Because, yeah, because you're going to be like, oh, this is good. Okay.
Yeah. That's awesome. Um, okay, let's talk about because you talked about talking to friends and family. networking is a huge part of selling. So, as somebody who hates the network, I absolutely hate it. Um, I'm an introvert. I want to leave my basement. Sell me on the necessity of networking with people who might buy my book,
Okay,
might buy my story.
first of all, I don't think you're an introvert because you talk all day on your podcast and to your clients and in your other jobs.
I fake it
So
very well.
you're not an introvert. But no one like I again, just like pitching, I'm the weirdo that loves talking to strangers. And I
Mhm.
recognize that I that no one else is like that.
It's
So
like a superpower. I totally wish talking to strangers completely exhausts me.
Okay, so I'm going to take the exhaustion piece first, and then
Okay.
then I have some other tips. So it exhausts me too. You've got to get your energy up. I call it being perky. You have to
Hmm.
have that active listening we were talking about, and that's tiring. So if you're just so manage yourself, say to yourself, I'm going to go to this party or this networking mixer and talk to two people, and then I can leave.
Hmm.
Like, really set manageable, achievable goals. And you might find after you've talked to your two people that you're having a good time and you want to stay longer, or you
Hmm.
might be like, I'm done, I'm going home. But if you don't have to be the weirdo like me, you can just set small goals for yourself because those two people you meet could make your career. You don't know.
Hmm.
And it's back to practice. The more you do it, the easier it gets. So if you set these small goals, eventually it'll be easier. So if you're going to a conference, don't try to go to every mixer. Don't try to go to every panel. Build in time to take a nap or take a
Hmm.
walk or take a swim, something. That's fine. Even I have to do that. And I love this. I love conferences. You're not going to get anything out of it if you're exhausted. So build in time. Maybe I like to go out to dinner with people at night. Maybe that's not your thing and you need to go back to your room at 6 o'clock. It's, whatever it is, don't feel like you have to push yourself, but do set some small goals and meet them. And I think you'll be surprised because you'll start feeling better and you might, stay at the party till 2 in the morning. I don't know.
Nice. Do you, so this is something I do that I've always thought is weird, but I'm going to see if you'll confirm that you do it as well. Before I go to any kind of conference, I like look at as much of the list of attendees and speakers as I can, and I totally stalk them and like then quasi hunt them at the conference. Is that something you do too?
Yes, and I don't think that's weird. That's smart. That was one of the questions you asked me. So, let me answer that, and then I'm going to circle back to how to introduce yourself.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, because
so,
that's going to be my next question is like, so when you find them, how do you not approach them like and not come off like a crazy person? Because
uh, Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
So, yes. So let's talk. So now we're talking networking at conferences or mixers and talking to people that you really want to talk to.
Hmm.
So the first piece is what Jeff said, which is ahead of time, look at who the attendees are at the conference, both the other people that are just going and the people that are speaking and doing the panels, and figure out who you want to talk to, who you want to connect with. The part two of that is figure out what you want to get out of the interaction. And it could be anything. It can be, I just want to tell this person, I just want to fan geek about this person and their writing. It could be, I want to hire this coach. I want to get my book in front of this agent. What it could be
Hmm.
a lot of different things. So figure out what your goal is. And then the part two of that is to not come across as stalkery. You don't want to have your manuscript in your hand and be like, "Hey, read this." That's just no. The first encounter is to introduce yourself and start building a relationship. So whether that's, "Hey, I'm this kind of writer. I'm looking for an agent."
Mm.
Something a little less low key than read my manuscript or read my screenplay, right? Um, and then you want to start to build the relationship, and the encounters are going to go better for you if you have a very specific goal in mind. It
Mm.
might be hey, Jeff, can you introduce me to Lindsay? It could be something like that. Like you want an introduction from someone they know. So
Hmm.
it can be anything. And then once you have met that person, hopefully they'll give you their email, follow up. So following up, everyone's terrible at it. You've got to do it. So the best thing to do is follow up the week after the conference. Maybe it's all weekend, wait till Tuesday because everyone has conference fatigue on Monday.
Hmm.
Remind them, say, hey, Jeff, it's Lindsay. We met after the X panel. I'm the crazy girl from Texas with the funny dog or whatever. Remind them of something that you talked about.
Yeah.
And then say, you mentioned you would like to read my manuscript, or you mentioned you're looking for action thrillers. And then give them your cocktail pitch of your thing.
Hmm.
Would you be interested in reading it? Like you want to follow up
Gotcha.
and then build the relationship, email them occasionally, link in with them. If they're on social media, follow them on social media, like their posts, subscribe to their newsletter and write
Yeah.
them back like I did Jeff, that's how he and I got to know each other.
Yeah.
So just any way you can engage, you're going to build the relationship. And the other hint is when you put them in your contacts, right where you met them. And it was at the Dialogue Doctor Conference in January 24.
Hmm.
And anything you learned about them, they have 5 kids. They all play ice hockey, anything, because you think you're going to remember and you won't. And I still have in my contacts where I met now some of my best writer friends. And it's
Nice.
like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, yeah, we did meet at that thing, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
because you think you're going to remember and you won't.
No. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of times, maybe you can speak to this, but I feel like a lot of times when I'll like stalk somebody pre-conference and I'll be like, okay, and I go like full out. I'll read everything they've ever written. I'll like get as like way too far. And then
No, no, I love that. Because again, people think they can wing it. I love all that prep. Love it,
yeah,
love it, love
the
it.
the problem is I see them and I'll like cross the conference very anxiously. And then instead of being like, "Hey, I'm Jeff. It's nice to meet you," I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I love this thing that you did. This was really good. It's so amazing." And all of a sudden, they look like a deer in headlights. Like, you know, is this guy going to follow me to my hotel room and murder me in the hallway? Like, so yeah, I think I like what you're describing. I think there's a necessary maybe confidence and self-assurance in what you're talking about. Am
Yes.
I making sense?
Yes, and I think it goes back to practicing. Okay.
Hmm.
I still get fangirl vibes, all right? I mean, everyone does. So, and I get nervous before things, and that's again why I practice.
Hmm.
So, I think not just research. I love that you do all that research. So, please y'all listening do that too. But think about have a specific goal in mind from the interaction, right? You want to have them introduce you to someone else. Do you just want to tell them how much their book has meant to you? Do you want to get their email so that you can build a relationship? Are you hoping to convince them to read your script or your manuscript? Like have a specific goal, and that's going to help the anxiousness and you feeling like you don't know what to say. So if you have a goal and you've practiced, that's going to
Yeah.
help, right? But you know what? Everyone gets nervous and you can flub it. And you know what? It's not the end of the world. That person is worrying about their babysitter and how to pay their mortgage and they're not going to see you at the next conference and be like, "Oh yeah, that Jeff, boy." I mean, they're just not.
Hmm.
So, I mean, unless you are super weird and stalkery, which I know you're
I
not.
mean, I got some stories.
I have I only have one weird story about an encounter, and it was actually a meet and greet. So if we have time, I'll circle back and tell
Yeah,
you.
I really want to hear that
Crazy.
story.
Where I was like, why is the door of my office closed? It was anyway. But let's talk about what you say about yourself, okay?
Mm.
So when I live in Houston now, but when I was in Los Angeles, I was a hardcore networker and I was going to 3 and 4 things a week. And a lot
Wow.
of them were for writers, and it was to meet writers because that was
Mm.
my job, was to hire them and find them. And I would say, "Oh, and so what do you do?" And I every time they would go, "I'm a writer." I mean, and some of these
There is a
people,
necessary shame. There's like a, this is what I do. This is, yeah.
yes, they would just, and some of these people, some of them, they were insecure because they hadn't broken through yet, but some of them were big working writers,
Yeah.
people you would know. And it just drives me crazy because you can't start off that way. You guys, you've got to be proud. Being a writer is a big deal to most people. When I introduce myself as a writer, everyone is like, "Oh, really? What do you write? What do you do?" People think it's cool. Even if you're at a conference where everyone's a writer,
Mm.
it's a big deal. So, my first thing is be proud, own it, stand up straight, say with a big grin, "I'm a writer." Now, my second beef is that people always, and authors do this too. So this is screenwriters and authors. They just say, "I'm a writer." Well, so, do you write instruction manuals? Like, come on. So the first thing is I want you to say the kind of writer you are. So I'm a screenwriter. I'm a
Mm.
novelist. You've got to, if you're a screenwriter, you have to drill down more. I write 1 hour dramas. Say
Mm.
what you do, then say the kind of writer you are. And I call this your writer logline. So in entertainment, a logline is a 1 sentence description of your screenplay. It's like the TV guide description, right?
Yeah.
And people have loglines too. So your writer logline is the kind of stories you write. So you can start with your genre. I'm an action adventure novelist, and
Mm.
I write stories about kick-ass women who save the men and
Yeah.
get the gold, right? So my favorite movie is Raiders of the Lost Ark. I don't know if you can see, I have a poster of it. So
Nice.
if you told me that, I'd be like, oh, I gotta read that, right? I
Yeah.
love that kind of stuff. So you want to say the kind of writer you are and the kinds of stories you tell, because that is interesting to
Mm.
everyone, whether you're
Yeah.
at a writers conference full of other writers or you're talking to someone who's never met an author before. So that's how you introduce yourself.
Mm.
And then if you have a book that's out now, then or a book that's about to drop, you can say, "On my latest project is," like for me, I would say, "is how to turn your screenplay into a novel." And then I
Mm.
always say, "Guess what it's about," because it's obvious. But and you can then list the name of your latest book or screenplay or whatever it is. So that's how you introduce yourself.
Nice. Okay, so I'm going to summarize all that we've learned real quick because we are part of the reason that I was pumped about talking to you is because we are moving into like kind of author conference season, if there is such a thing. It seems like they
Yeah.
all kind of happen. There's like two waves of them in the fall and then in the spring. Um, so here's what I've heard so far. I need to come with a plan. I need to know what I want. Ideally, when I'm coming to a conference, I'm like, okay, these are a couple people I want to connect to when I go. And I'm not going to charge them like a crazed bull. I'm going to go to make a connection. I'm going to know my introduction, like how to introduce myself, and I'm going to do it without putting my head down and mumbling. I'm going to be
Yes.
professional about it. I would talk about what I'm writing, and when I talk about what I'm writing, I'm going to pitch. I'm going to have the cocktail pitch that you described, which is the uh, this meets this hook, and then a connection to the character that kind of gives the emotional touchdowns.
Yep.
How'd I do?
I think that's great. So you're going to talk about what you write, the kind of writer you are. If it's appropriate, you're going to do a cocktail pitch of your project, and you're going
Mm,
to have a goal from the interaction.
gotcha.
Get
Yeah.
something out of the interaction.
What's a reasonable goal for somebody to have? Let's say I'm going to
Well,
a
who
conference. I'm
are
like,
you talking to?
let's say I'm going to get an agent that I know represents either screenplays or novels like I am writing.
Okay. So you've done your research. You know Josie represents action adventure things.
Hmm.
So your goal is to get her to ask for your script, ask for your manuscript.
Yeah.
And you're going to get that goal by saying, well, first of all, you have to know that she's open to new clients because agents open and close for new clients.
Hmm.
So if you know she's open for new clients, then your goal is to have the interaction you described where you introduce yourself and you say your cocktail pitch and say, are you interested in reading my manuscript? If she's not open for new clients, you still want to connect with her because she represents the kind of book she writes. So you
Mm.
go in, you talk to her, you do your writer's log line about the kind of stories you write, and you say, I know you're not looking for new clients right now, but I write the kind of stories you represent, and I would love to stay in touch. May I have your email?
Mm.
And then you write her a follow-up email. I was so lovely to meet you. And you reference something she talked about on the panel or when you spoke that, stroke her ego. I love when you said XYZ on the panel. People, everyone's human. They love compliments.
Oh my gosh, people love to hear that stuff. That's the
Yeah.
best. People love
Yeah.
to be like, oh, and I will say, like, I get a ton of pitches for the podcast, and when people say, I listened to X episode and it had this in it and I really liked that, I know they probably only listened to that one episode, but I still like it. It's still better than, yeah, you
Well,
know,
yeah,
the
because
non-connection at all. Yeah.
yes, and they've done their homework because the worst
Hmm.
is getting pitches when it's clear they haven't even looked at your website, let alone listened to something,
Mm,
right? Um, yes,
yeah.
people and everyone wants to feel heard. So yes, 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 yes. And then um put on your calendar that you're gonna email her in 6 months or 3 months, whatever feels right, and ask her if she's open for submissions yet.
Mm,
Remind her where you met and put your little writer logline in again, and that's how you build a relationship. Very low key and respectful.
nice.
Did that
Yeah.
help?
That did help. And I think part of what you're saying that I just want to pull out as we talk is that smaller, manageable goals, like what's the goal from the initial conversation? To get her email address.
Yeah.
What's the goal of the first email? To like establish a little more contact, right? Like not at the first conversation, not showing up thinking like, I'm going to get her to represent me
Right.
at this moment, right? Like yeah.
I
Um,
mean, it could happen, but probably not. You gotta build those relationships.
yeah, yeah. Um, okay, so your newest book is How to Turn Your Screenplay into a Novel. I read it. It's a great book. You did a great job with it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it really does cover. I would say it's good, not even for people who've just written a screenplay and want to turn it into a novel, but just for people looking to publish for the first time in general. There's so much like really helpful, useful information in there. Like I found your publishing section to be really solid and thorough. So I thought
Oh,
it was good.
thank you.
Yeah. Um, so talk to I think there's a lot of people probably listening that either have screenplays and are thinking like, what do I do with this thing? Or vice versa. They have a novel and they're like, maybe I'll turn this into a screenplay.
Okay.
So can you talk about the difference between the two mediums? Because I find them to be, and I think people are like, oh, I'm just going to take this novel and whip it into a screenplay. Have never read a screenplay. They don't know what it is. So
Yeah.
could you talk a little bit about the difference, not even necessarily in formatting, but just in like when you think screenplay, what are you looking for versus when you think novel, what are you looking for? Like, what are the differences in those two storytellings?
Sure. First, I'm going to start off with what is similar. So,
Mm,
I story is the same no matter what format. It's all, beginning and middle end, your three acts.
mm,
You've got characters and conflict and emotion. So that's all the same. The main difference between a screenplay and a novel is a screenplay is told from outside the characters. You're
mm,
watching everything. And a novel, you get to be inside the characters' heads and have experienced things. You get to hear their thoughts and their feelings. In a screenplay, there's none of that in the written document. That is all stuff that you hope, it doesn't always happen, but you hope your actors can bring to the table. So a screenplay is a real interesting piece of literature because it's like an imaginary document is what I say to my screenwriters because it's written document, right? A document
mm,
for a visual medium. So there's this weird juxtaposition. So you have to tell your story through pictures, but you're using words to do it. So it's just there's a little bit of a weird disconnect going on. Screenplays are kind of a blueprint for a movie. They're not the final thing because you
Mm,
have the actors and the director and all the other artists come in and put their imprint on it. So if you haven't read a screenplay, there's a lot of them that are available online for free. Just
mm,
Google your favorite movie, and people have put up some version of the script. Some libraries have them. If most colleges now have screenwriting programs everywhere. It used to just be LA and New York, but they're everywhere now. And so your local college library might have some scripts you can check out. So I encourage people to look at it because you'll see what I mean. So there is description. It's a very minimal. You, for instance, when a character is introduced, you say their age and maybe three adjectives about them, and that is it. The same with the setting. We know where we are, Lindsey's house, Lindsey's office day,
hmm
and then you might say she sits at her desk. That's it. So much of it is up to the people that come later. Versus a novel, you have to put that's the adjustment for screenwriters who have never written a novel is now they've got to go in and fill in all the stuff that your imagination fills in when you're reading a script and that later on the
hmm
filmmakers fill in. You've got to explain your setting, and most importantly, you have to get in your characters' heads and say, express their thoughts and feelings.
hmm
So that is the biggest difference is you have to tell a story visually through dialogue in a screenplay, and the world is your oyster when you are a novelist because you can go you can have 1,000 different locations, whereas the screenplay you have to think about budget. You can't have a
hmm
thousand locations. That would be so expensive. And a novel, we are inside the character's mind. We feel the thoughts and feelings. We're right there with them. In a screenplay, the poor actors get this script with very little information, and they have to go through and parse out stuff about the character and then make the rest up. That's why actors get awards. There's a lot to it that
hmm
they're bringing to the table. So that's the difference.
Yeah, I think I like that. When we like, well, in the Patreon community, we actually read screenplays,
Oh, cool.
probably like three or four a year, with the purpose of like, hey, if you if you want a novel to easily translate into a screenplay, having a novel that's dialogue centric, that is like based in the conversations between the characters, makes it super easy. And I think the good news about having a screenplay go to a novel is that, not strong novels are also dialogue based. So like all of that extra stuff you have in a novel sometimes can actually make it much harder for the reader to engage with. It's
Right.
like you were saying, it's like that character's emotional journey. What's nice about a screenplay is, for me, is that that's all you get. You get the character's emotional journey through what they vocalize and say, and like their nonverbals sometimes, and that's what you get to use to like it's like stripping down storytelling
It is,
into like
yes.
just the foundations. Yeah. So I think I think it's a fascinating practice and like a great medium to study either like for novelists to look at so they kind of understand. Especially since we live in this weird like golden age of visual media. You got to know that like your readers are watching way more than they're reading. And
Yes.
so their brains are like connecting to that in a deeper way.
Well, I always see a movie in my head,
hmm
always, whether I'm reading a novel or a script. I see the whole thing play out in my head. And I guess that's because I was from a very young age a TV movie fanatic.
I think we all do that now. Like I think that's kind of what we do is we watch it in our head. And I can't say that even back to like the 1970s, that's what readers were doing.
Yeah.
Like I think, I think that's a newer development that when we read, we're kind of picturing it as a movie going on in our head. Whereas like, when they read The Tale of Two Cities, I don't know that that was happening. And so he could get away with the like 5 to 7 philosophical opening paragraphs that give you no, it's the best of times, it was the worst of times. Like that doesn't translate into a screenplay well. So it's that kind of like, but I think it also doesn't necessarily translate into the modern reader's mind like
Yes.
it used to in the contemporary of the story.
Well,
Yeah.
I just think, like I said, story is story. And so I think you can learn a lot from movies and TV in terms of what works and what doesn't, and genre
Mhm.
conventions. And the same thing for screenwriters. I mean, I tell them you've got to read not just scripts, but books, novels in your genre.
Yeah.
So,
Um, okay, this has been super, super helpful. Any like
yay.
final tips we haven't talked about that you'd give to writers? There doesn't have to be, but
I would just say that in terms of networking, you may be the answer to someone's prayers. There might be someone in that room that has been looking for your exact story,
mm,
or looking for your exact, like, point of view,
mm,
something. And so if you go in, that should give you confidence because maybe someone really needs you in there.
mm,
And so you should take that confidence and flip it and be like, oh, I'm so excited. I'm going to go in and, make someone's day, I think is a great way to think about networking.
that's awesome. Okay, if somebody wants to work with you, where can they, because you do coaching, you do advising, where can they find you?
They can find me at thepitchmaster.com. And I also write a weekly newsletter for writers, both screenwriters and novelists. And they can subscribe to that at thepitchmaster.com/newsletter.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lindsay. This was great.
This was so fun. Thank you, Jeff, for having me.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit stop and we can talk a little bit more.
Okay.